First, it was a sanctuary for illegals, and now California is blowing smoke at the federal government once again, trying to become a sanctuary for marijuana users. And joining me now is Republican strategist Harmeet Dhillon. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Happy to be here, Heather.
So explain to us a little bit, what is it exactly that California is trying to do now?
So what's happening now in California is in the Assembly, one of our members of the Assembly has introduced a bill to prevent California law enforcement and California government officials from cooperating with the federal government in terms of any marijuana enforcement. And this comes up because we have a state law that has legalized not just medical marijuana, but also recreational marijuana as of January 1st. And just today, the city of Berkeley, right across the bay from where I am today, has legalized, has issued a law just like that, which says that the city of Berkeley is a sanctuary city for marijuana enforcement. So it's creating chaos between the federal government and the state government.
And as you continue to talk about that, let's bring up the details of California's Prop 64, which are the reduced penalties for cannabis offenses, and it lays out this framework for the pot business. How could this turn into this showdown and this clash between the state and federal government?
Well, so first, it's important to know that this is really posturing along the lines of what the Attorney General in California has already been doing. He's filed 24 lawsuits against so-called, resistance lawsuits against our federal government. But in reality, what happens is the federal government is going to continue to be able to come in here and make arrests right in front of state law enforcement, whether they like it or not. And we have a supremacy clause in our Constitution that says that the federal law is supreme over the state law. But I think what's really awkward here is they're putting these law enforcement officers who are, generally people who want to enforce the law in a very awkward position because they do have an obligation. They took an oath under the Constitution to support federal law, and now they're being told not to do that. So it is kind of chaos, and I know that it's going to throw a lot of businesses into some uncertainty because it doesn't really protect them. It's just sort of virtue signaling by our Attorney General and by this legislative action.
Yeah, so it's a new area of concern for officers when they have to make that choice. So where do you think that's heading?
Well, what's interesting is typically drug interdiction efforts historically have been done in a state and federal joint task force type of a situation. So normally they're used to cooperating with each other. And now this particular law and this regime, it just covers marijuana, but they're still supposed to be cooperating with the feds with cocaine and other stuff. And as we all know, it doesn't operate in a vacuum. So it's not going to be the case that marijuana is neatly off to the side in one place and then all the other drugs are separate. Mm-hmm. So I think it's going to cause some confusion, and some law enforcement officers are going to run into potentially putting themselves in violation of California state law if they honor their obligations under the federal law.
Yeah,
so
and then could they be prosecuted?
These are diametrically opposed.
Yeah, so
yes,
then
they could under these regimes.
Yeah. So why is California doing this?
Yeah.
Why is California doing this?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the Attorney General and our governor and most of our Democratic legislature has been very adamantly opposed to the president. So even though the election took place in 2016, they're still campaigning against the president and using this as a prop for getting votes from our electorate. But I think they may be pushing it a little too far because even a lot of Democratic voters here in California, they're not nuts about there being sort of drug chaos here in the streets. And, we have a lot of problems here in the state. And so this idea that you can just sort of pick and choose which federal laws you want to follow and which you don't with the sanctuary, as you mentioned in the lead-in, that is going to lead to real chaos in our state. And we already have a situation with some serious crime increases here in the state. So it'll be interesting to see when voters finally pull the plug on this trend of just ignoring the laws that they don't like from Washington.
Yeah. So perhaps more of a political statement that they're trying to make versus what's best for the state. Harmeet, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us this morning. Great to have you with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.